I'm Glenn McGinnis, and welcome to Outburst. From the environment to defense to the economy to pop culture, very few nations are as aligned and intertwined as Canada and the United States.
With Trump being president, even though I live in Canada, feel super scared for the state of the world.
We're basically tiptoeing around them, but most of the world is at this point.
They don't realize how much they need us and aren't really willing to negotiate, it's kind of there we are the highway.
If the States is gonna work as its own country, it needs to realize that it has its own obligations to stay open to other countries who want to trade with them, even like Mexico and Canada, not just one place, because we can't give them everything.
From NAFTA to NATO to the WTO, Canada and the US have been in lockstep for decades over the most important defense and trade issues for North America. But those international partnerships have been showing some strain.
Canada has treated us very badly. They've treated our farmers in Wisconsin and New York State and a lot of other states very badly.
US President Donald Trump has been critical, and Canadian leaders have been very cautious. This relationship is very important for both countries. It's worth $1.4 trillion. Canada is the top trading partner for most American states, exporting cars, gold, and oil. Canadian companies employ 500,000 Americans inside the United States. And there are hundreds of thousands of Americans living in Canada. How would you describe the Canada-US relationship today?
Tense, to say the least.
Heated.
Very tense.
A little strained, I guess.
Comical, to say the least.
Not great in our eyes, but I would say they got to be happy with it.
I think they're like this, I guess.
Right now, it's a difficult time. It's like a sibling rivalry right now.
Maybe not as good as it's been, but in general, I think a fairly strong relationship.
It doesn't seem to be going too badly. I'm not sure. Not a big Donald Trump fan, but I think Trudeau is a good person there. And anyway, it seems to be reasonable on it anyway, I think.
A bit of a gong show, probably, the way the two leaders go at it. So as far as that goes, the politics of it has been, to me, it's been entertaining. What do you call it, reality television?
Well, if we got rid of Trudeau and Trump, it'd be better. It's terrible. Trump screwed us out of everything with taxes on our treaties, tariffs on our steel, our oil. I say build a border, build a wall, and not sell them anything.
I think that Canada's being more than patient, as most countries around the world are being asked to do. And doing the best is what one can do under difficult circumstances.
They're working on it. Canada's doing their best to, be polite. I don't know.
Tough to say at the moment. Depends what you're talking about, whether it's trade or if it's just overall relations between the common people, I think that's what it comes down to. So, that's my opinion.
Seems to be a little bit tumultuous, I guess. I'm not really sure where we stand. We're always seeing disagreement between both sides, but I'm not sure if that would change depending on who's in power or not, or just a new era of politics introduced by our friend down south, Mr. Trump. But probably not as strong as it used to be, and hopefully we'll be strong again one day. But I'm not traveling there anytime soon. I'm not sure how many are traveling up here either.
My relationship with the U.S. is good. I enjoy traveling there. I understand that the trade tariff is probably going to lead to, or already has led to some negative effects in terms of the relationship between the United States and Canada. But overall, I think that our relationship is crucial because obviously we rely on each other for a lot of products, and our economy kind of depends on them.
It's our biggest trade partner and our closest neighbor, so I think we still have a pretty good relationship. I know families and friends in Canada have many family and friends in the States, so it's a pretty still tight-knit relationship.
I do believe that things are changing, and I think that maybe Canada's approaching adolescence in some ways, and we're starting to sort of dig our heels in a little bit, and with some maturity with that, and starting to have a voice when it comes to sort of standing up to what sometimes appears as a big bully.
We are two countries that are very similar, not exactly the same by any stretch, very similar, and I don't think that's going to be any different. I think it's overblown that there's a problem between Canada and the U.S. I really don't believe that's the case. I'm Georgianne Burke. I'm a dual citizen of Canada and the United States, and I'm an unabashed supporter of Donald Trump. I first came to Canada in 1987. I moved up here actually for a job. I was working for a company in Buffalo, New York, and they transferred me to do marketing in Toronto. I found that culturally, Canada is quite different from the United States in many, many ways. And actually, I joke now that I've picked up so much of the Canadian outlook. I'm more polite than I used to be when I came here. And actually, politically, that kind of affected my attitude with U.S. politics, because I see the kind of harsh side of U.S. politics as compared to Canadian politics. When I came to Canada, the first party that I connected with was the NDP. And most people who know me are totally surprised by that. But the reason is that in the United States, I was a very left-wing Democrat. And I had always admired Ed Broadbent from the U.S. He was at the time the leader of the NDP. And felt like that was going to be my philosophical and political home. And I realized, the more I thought about it, that I was actually more a conservative with a small c than I was, to the left. And kind of began to move in that direction around 1997. Then met some people in the Provincial Conservative Party and in the Canadian Alliance, and made the move in 1998-99. And why do I support Donald Trump? I actually came about it late. I was a Marco Rubio supporter, which would be no surprise to anyone who actually knows me, because he's more in my ballpark than Trump would appear to be. But why I support him is I support him for probably the reasons that people don't like him. He's very straightforward. What you see is what you get. Does he exaggerate? Yeah, he does. Does he sometimes say things that aren't correct? Yes, he does. He does that. But I'm going to tell you that is true of every politician. The only difference is that he is scrutinized to a degree that I've never seen before.
Thank you, Mr. President. We love you.
Being a Trump supporter in Canadian politics is a challenge, and in Canadian society, even a bigger challenge. They, first of all, are shocked that I'm a Trump supporter because I don't fit the profile. I'm not wearing a plaid coat, carrying a gun. I'm not a white male. So they're having a hard time computing that I could possibly be a Trump supporter. That's the image they have. And, by implication, they're attacking me as well when they say things like, he's stupid, he's a bigot, he's an anti-Semite, he's a homophobe, he's a racist. That implies that if I support him, I'm all those things as well. And I'm actually none of those things. And I believe that he is none of those things as well. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to support him. Canadians have a very negative opinion of Trump and anyone who supports him. And if they don't really have a connection to me personally, they're not as willing to give me that benefit of the doubt, I guess is the way I'd put it. So NAFTA obviously is a massive issue for Canada and for the United States. It is no secret that Donald Trump said from day one that he felt NAFTA was a bad deal for the United States and that he was intending to renegotiate it. They didn't like that Canada felt they could interfere in labor relations in the U.S., LGBTQ issues, indigenous issues, climate change. They said that's none of your business and it has nothing to do with trade. So I think it was mishandled. I think there was a lot of negativity coming from Canada. I don't think Canada is going to be so killed off because of this, but it would have been a lot smarter if it would have been handled in a more, I guess I would use the word diplomatic way.
Donald Trump did not visit Canada in his first year. Who was the last president to do the same?
Ronald Reagan.
I have no idea.
Give me a guess.
The last president to not visit? George Bush.
I believe Obama didn't visit in his first year.
The choices are Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter.
Gerald Ford.
Okay, I'm going to give you a hint. Okay? Peanut farmer from Plains, Georgia.
Bush. George W. Senior.
Could it be Jimmy Carter?
I have no idea, man. I told you I didn't even have dignity. You think I got the answer?
You know what?
What?
It's Jimmy Carter.
Dignity!
Before Donald Trump left Canada off his list of visits in his first year in office, the last U.S. president to do the same was Jimmy Carter. Carter was President of the United States from 1977 to 1981, and his first trip abroad was to the UK in May of 1977. Warren G. Harding was the first American president to visit Canada when he stopped in Vancouver on the way back to Washington from Alaska in 1923. Since 1981, Presidents Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Clinton, George W. Bush, and Obama have all visited Canada in their first year. In his first 4 years as president, Jimmy Carter did not officially visit Canada at all. How important is the relationship between Canada's Prime Minister and the American President?
I think it's super important. I think like he should definitely try to make a deal that's like beneficial for Canadians with the U.S. president for sure. It needs to be a good relationship because like we're Canada, we kind of need the United States to be honest. So yeah, that's what I think.
So being friendly with the president and having a good rapport is going to benefit us, you think?
Oh yes, 100%. Yeah.
I'd like it to be important, but considering what he's doing right now, I don't care if we talk to him or not.
Why?
Because I don't believe Canada stands for anything what Donald Trump is doing and what he's standing for with the caravan coming up, with racist political campaigns going on right now for the midterms. We need to say, you're not doing anything right, and if our Prime Minister, Trudeau, can stand up to him and say what you're doing is wrong, I'm very much in favor of that.
Very important.
Why?
Because they're so big. They're such a big market. Anything they do can really affect us. Like they could put our economy in recession instantly by changing trade policies or something. So we have to try to stay. Even though he's not a very nice person, we have to try to stay friendly with him.
Well, I think it's very important. I think Prime Minister Mulroney was correct in saying that that was the primary file of the Prime Minister, that and foreign affairs. And of course, that comes within the ambit of foreign affairs.
He also enjoyed a very friendly relationship with Ronald Reagan.
Yes, he worked on it. It was a first priority for him, and he was very successful in forming a very strong personal relationship with Ronald Reagan. That's correct.
What do you think the benefits from that were?
I think he had access to Ronald Reagan in a way that he wouldn't have had if he didn't have the personal relationship. And I think he probably had a credibility in what he was offering to President Reagan at that time that he otherwise might not have had.
Worldwide, it's very important. We have to communicate. We can't isolate ourselves, right? Agriculture, manufacturing must go on, and people want jobs.
And you think a healthy relationship between the two leaders would enhance that?
Yes, I think it will, because they're the prime persons, for our country. They were voted in, So I think they should do a good job for us,
If those relationships fail, we lose business with our biggest trading partner, so very important.
Which could be catastrophic economically?
Absolutely, yeah.
How could our trade relationship with the U.S. be improved?
I think that we should hold our own and not just be bullied by the United States. I'm really proud of Chrystia Freeland for sticking up for Canada.
Our trade relationship with the U.S. could be improved by boycotting the U.S. I think what's happening in the States is absolutely deplorable. I don't think it represents at all what Canadians believe in, and I think that we need to take some strong action.
But with boycotting the U.S., could we actually afford to do something like that?
I think we really have to look at how we manage the rise of significant problems across our globe right now in regards to how we're treating newcomers to this country, how we treat newcomers in the world, how we treat refugees, etc. And I think we have to have some bold new leadership in regards to who we are collaborating with, which countries we're working with, and ones that show what our government is showing in regards to believing in diversity in this country and in the world, and the value of that.
Well, number one, the obvious thing is to get somebody in the White House who's a little bit more amenable to open dialogue instead of exclamations and, I don't know, blatant lies. We need somebody who's a little bit more honest in their dealings with Canada. I think Canada did a great job. It's just the U.S. had some tough obstacles that they had to get past before they could even get to the negotiating table.
If it should change, I think it's dramatically changed. And as long as the current administration south of the border acts the way they act and asking for what they're asking for, I think we've got a major change in our trade. And unfortunately, I think that'll probably live beyond Mr. Trump's tenure in the office, whether it's 4 years or 8 years.
I think it should be the way it was before. NAFTA was good. Somebody did away with that.
I would say it's to look at both sides and maybe find a way to meet in the middle, because clearly there's two opposite views. We're aware of what President Trump thinks. We're clearly aware of what Justin Trudeau thinks, but somehow having a place in the middle to have a conversation about what do we have in common versus what's different about us.
I live really close to the border at home, and so I think being able to go back and forth and keeping free trade and commerce open is really essential to us as individuals and as well as the full government too.
A little less ego by the leaders. I feel that they're a little both egotistical in the sense that they both want their ways and they're not really thinking about the people. So if they think about accommodating the people more so than accommodating their ego, then I think we'd all be better off.
So you think that's kind of a shared blame of both Trump and Trudeau?
Well, predominantly Trump, but the fact that Trudeau refuses to back down, obviously there's a little bit of ego there too, right? At the end of the day, if we all work together, it'll be a happier world. So that's the way I look at it.
Who was the first U.S. president to address Canada's parliament?
Oh man, these are tough. Teddy Roosevelt.
I'll stick with FDR.
That's all I'll say. FDR.
Nixon.
Nixon.
Your choices are George H.W. Bush, Harry Truman, Woodrow Wilson. Bush, Truman, or Wilson?
I'd say Truman. I don't think it would have been as early as Bush.
I'm going to say Truman. Or Wilson. Wilson. Wilson.
Truman.
That's Harry Truman.
Woohoo!
Good for you, man.
Thanks.
Thanks, bud. Harry Truman was the first U.S. president to address a joint session of Parliament. That was back in 1947. Truman's speech focused on the friendship and long-standing relationship between the two countries. He said, "The example of accord provided by our two countries did not come about merely through the happy circumstance of geography. It is compounded of 1 part proximity and 9 parts goodwill and common sense." Truman also mentioned the work of the Permanent Joint Board on Defense, an advisory body that was established in 1940. Its main purpose was to allow both countries to come together and advise on continental defense during the Second World War. Now, it was being made permanent. That cooperation holds strong to this day, and the Permanent Joint Board on Defense is but one of a series of shared military and security relationships that include NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, the North American Maritime Security Initiative, and the Tri-Command Cooperative Initiatives.
We have no military obligation in the United States. We have an alliance called NATO and NORAD, and we will live up to those obligations and continue to do so as we signed on decades ago.
Obviously we're a small country. We should do as we do with our other allies as a support system. Right now, I'm not exactly sure how Mr. Trump feels about our participation in anything with the United States, but we've been supporting the United States forever. I don't see any reason for that to quit today.
None.
I mean, we don't want to fight, right? That's the whole thing. We don't want to fight. So we go in to provide peace and some sense of calm, and I think that there should be zero obligation for anyone to have to go fight his fight.
Well, if an outside enemy would attack the United States, I guess Canada should help them, and should be the same if someone would attack Canada. I mean, it's the same continent. We should keep our continent safe. I think so. I mean, who would attack the United States, right? Or Canada, but if that would happen, yeah, I would expect Canada to help the United States and the opposite.
I don't know. I feel like they should back them up if they think it's fair and whether everyone else is on board. And if we're the only ones backing them up, I don't think we should do it.
Honestly, we all share North America, so we should all just be friends. And sorry, I'm trying to close my Putin as I answer this question. Basically, we should all just work together as North America as a unit, because there's not that much difference between Canada and the U.S., honestly.
I think Canada should have obligations to itself in terms of militarism. And I don't think that we have the resources to be obligated for them.
I think they should help the U.S. when needed, because they are our neighbors and they're close by. But we shouldn't see as their relationships like our relationships.
Given that they're probably the most powerful country in the world, we definitely have to play nice in the sandbox, and they, we should be an ally, and we should always try and aim to be an ally of the United States. That doesn't mean we have to be the yes man, but we definitely have to be their ally.
Shouldn't be any more than they've been. You're just there to support. The Americans are the powerhouse, so they want to be big brother. They can keep doing what they do.
I mean, Canada's always been the peace treaty of the world, right? I think Canada is a good example of what not to do as far as the United States goes. The United States has always been like trying to create this big impact and be the forefront of everything in the world. Canada's always been the thought provoker on the side. I think that's leadership.
There's so much at stake when Americans head to the polls on the 6th of November. The U.S. Congress, Senate, and even some state governors could see changes. It's so important for the president and the Republican Party's political agenda. But for allies and others around the world, there's something else: the perception of power. How unified are the United States of America? How much influence does the president have at a local level in that country? And how much will politics south of the border affect this country in the coming year? Well, now it's your turn. How do American politics affect Canada?
Well, we have a lot of politics that are being affected because of the U.S. So right now, because of our new trade agreement with the U.S., Canada, Mexico agreement, our dairy products are being affected because we lost 4% of our market share of the dairy products. We also have the automotive industry that's affected also. Honestly, the U.S. has a big impact on our industry, obviously, because it's our next door neighbor, so a lot of our trades are being done with them.
They affect us in so many ways. It affects us as much, even as our exchange rate is affected by it. Difficulties crossing the border, that comes to mind with the, current legislation in Canada and the current administration.
You're talking about the marijuana legislation?
Marijuana legislation in particular, yeah, that came to mind. International trade is huge as well. I work for Canada's Export Credit Agency, so U.S.-Canada relations are always top of mind there.
I think, unfortunately, they have probably more impact on our own politics too, because of the amount of American content in the media that we consume on a daily basis. I think that Canadians are inherently subject to, the marketing intentions of media conglomerates in the United States, and I think, we oftentimes distract ourselves with what's, the bright headlines of the American political spectrum, and then in Canada we don't really know what's going on. So I think it, a huge play in Canadian politics, unfortunately.
I follow the news very carefully. I read the New York Times every day. I still tune into a lot of American news, and I care deeply about the future of the country. My name is Anne Kirkland. I moved to Canada on New Year's Eve of 1974, which now means I've lived here considerably longer than I ever lived in the US. Oh, first impressions were not good. It was cold. It was January 1st. We went out for New Year's dinner down to Ed's Warehouse, no longer existing on Front Street, and came out, and across the windshield of our car, which had a New York State plate on it, was a big sticker saying "Yankee, go home." So that was the first impression. I began to sense that there was a kind of hostility towards the U.S. and U.S. experience, and I learned quickly not to mention that, to just talk about ideas, and that there was a kind of sense of superiority I felt among Canadians towards Americans that caught me a bit by surprise. I was born in Philadelphia and moved after university to Boston for a couple years, and then to New York City for 5 years for graduate school. I came naive. I knew very little about Canada, and that's the stereotype Canadians have of Americans, and it was certainly true of me. I don't think I knew how many provinces there were. I didn't know anything about the Plains of Abraham or many of the names of the prime ministers. I think then, these are just my impressions, there was a generalized anti-American feeling and a sense of Canadian superiority, maybe because it was towards the end of the Vietnam War, and there were so many Americans who were here for that reason. And in Toronto, York University was new, and many people were recruited to teach. So there were lots of Americans swarming around. So I think the feeling then, to me, felt like a more generalized anti-American feeling. Now it feels much more particular towards certain policies, particular politicians and so forth, not so much towards individuals. I would say it has changed and has become more nuanced. The truth is we are so much more alike than we are different, and there are probably no two countries that are more alike. So we're talking about, distinctions that are really rather small. But there is an emotional tie and a hope for the U.S. somehow going, I don't know whether going back to, because I don't know if it was ever there, but we grew up with a strong sense of ideals about how the country was founded. And it has always seemed the country has fallen short. But there is still that aspiration and hope that the U.S. can live up to what its original intentions were. So I don't take pleasure in things that go wrong and tragedies and major missteps. So I care.
I'm Glenn McGuinness. On behalf of all my colleagues at the Cable Public Affairs channel, thanks for watching this week's episode of Outburst.